You're listening to Outrageous Love, the podcast. If you work in education and would like to share your journey to responsiveness, consider being a guest on our show. Send us an email at info@culturallyresponsive.org to get connected.
That's how I've looked at the rings of culture. I loved when we first dipped into this because most of the equity work that I had seen previous was only about race. And I had a hard time connecting into that. But when we hit rings of culture, I was like, oh, yes, because it really does allow everybody to honor where they've come from. I felt like I was able to honor the sacrifices that my family has had to do. I'm the most educated person in my family on both sides. So it's very interesting, how all of those things have come together to play.
From the Center for Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning, it's the Outrageous Love Podcast with your fabulous host, Dr. Shiraki Holly.
Welcome to Outrageous Love, the podcast. This is our last episode of season number 6, I want to say. We're excited and delighted, as always, honored and humbled. Thank you for listening in. This is a very, very special episode because we're opening up a new series, a new theme that I hope will engage you. It's called Don't Call Me White, Call Me Blank. And today we'll be talking to someone who's Italian and hear their story there. I'll give you a little history on where this is all coming from. But first, I want to start us off like we always start, by affirming ourselves. So tell your faces that you're happy. Smile at someone in your presence if you are in a public space. And this is just your way of saying, hey, no matter what's going on, I'm going to work through it. I could be frowning, but I've turned that frown upside down. And I'm going to see the lightness, regardless of what the situation is in. And we always have some situations going on just because of the world we live in, whether that's if that's in the macro society or in our individual personal or professional lives. All right, now we're going to do our second affirmation, and just again building off the work of Reverend Jesse Jackson and this whole promotion of self-worth and self-confidence, and acknowledging that regardless of the circumstances, we're still special. We're still all that, and we have to remind ourselves that constantly. So I'm just going to keep it simple. And I just want you just to say something positive about yourself. Just say whatever you're feeling. I want you to tell yourself you are that. So if you are brilliant, I want you to say, self, I'm brilliant. If you are enlightened, I want you to say, self, I am enlightened. And you're just telling yourself whatever that positivity is. I am confident. Self, I am confident. Self, I am smart. Self, I am driven. Self, I am motivated. Self, I am humorous. Self, I'm the life of the party. Whatever it is for you, I just want you to tell yourself that. Say, self, I am. And then the third affirmation is to give someone else some love. And we're just going to throw it back at someone. And what I want you to do, I read about this actually in a small talk. This article on small talk. Those of you who know me, I'm not really a good small talker, but I've been reading a lot about the importance of small talk. So I'm kind of trying to take that as a message. But I actually read a good article, New York Times, about the art of small talking. And this person pointed, it may have been in The Atlantic, I'm not sure. But this person pointed out how he intentionally sends just how you doing emails and texts to at least 5 people a day, and claims that he sent over the years over 50,000 of these messages. So I want you just to piggyback off of that. Just send someone, anybody, hey, how you doing? Thinking about you. Just wanted to say hello and hope you're having a good day. And the whole point is just the simplicity of it, but the idea that, small talk can be meaningful. I put that in air quotes, as I'm still kind of like a little bit of a skeptic, but I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm changing. So think about that. five people every day, this person reaches out and just sends a, hey, was thinking about you. Hope you're doing well. And I get those messages every once and again from folks who ignore my resistance to small talk. And I have to admit, I do appreciate it. So show someone else some love and send a, hey, how you doing? Thinking about you. Hope you're having a good day. Text or email to somebody in your circle. All right. So those are our affirmations. We're ready to move on. And in Dr. Holly's 2 cents, don't get it twisted. Dr. Holly's 2 cents. Here's what I've been thinking. Listen up. I'm going to give you the background, the history of why we're focusing for the next 3 episodes on don't call me white, call me blank, right? And it really all started in late fall of last year when I read an article about this notion of heritage culture, right? Because, I scour for culture stuff. And so it kind of intrigued me. I'm like, okay, heritage culture. And dug into it. And actually, it was really rooted in where we are in our country around white nationalism. And the root of it was you are considered heritage if you can trace your lineage to the Civil War, right? And if you're Caucasian, quote unquote, right, and you can trace your lineage to the Civil War, you're considered a heritage culture. And this becomes the basis of how some white nationalists are defining what we generically, and I think too broadly, characterize as whiteness. So that was interesting to me because for a lot of different reasons. One was it was still it's a form of nationalism in the context that you are truly, quote unquote, American if only you can trace your lineage to the Civil War, really to the Southern Civil War, right? To the Confederacy, basically. And I'm only giving you the information I read in the article, right? So this got me thinking about this push for white nationalism or the exclusion of quote unquote non-Americans in terms of our current immigration policies. Just got me thinking about this whole notion of the invention of the white race, which we've already talked about. Everyone knows, if we take a step back, that race is socially constructed. It's all made up. But as Ibram Kendi says, it doesn't really matter because we treat it as a mirage. And I think that's a very insightful metaphor because if you understand mirage, you see it as if it's real, right? And that's what we do at race. So like I've always thought to tell someone that race is all made up, is socially constructed, is really ain't saying nothing because we treat it as if it's real. And the example that I like is very, we treat Santa Claus as if he's real, right? If you come from another planet and you're around, the United States and other places around November and December, you would actually think there's a real being called Santa, right? Just because of everything that we do. It's all made up though. It's socially constructed. And so I've always held that position, and this is why, we focus on culture, not race, one of the reasons. But that still does not negate the academic conversation around, quote unquote, whiteness. And I first became aware of this a long time ago with this series of books called The Invention of the White Race. And there are 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2, and they are done by Theodore Allen. And if you read our blog newsletter, you will see it referenced in this month's edition, which will be coming out like in a week or so. But it really taught me a lot about how this shit is just all made up, right? And so, but we've made it so real by how we treat it and how we continue to talk about it as if it's a real thing, right? So I'm going to give you the key points in this book, The Invention of the White Race, which the subtitle is Racial Oppression and Social Class. And basically the thesis of the book, and I read this, folks, many years ago, but it's always driven our work and how we think it's important to separate race from culture and to remind ourselves, although it's pointless, that race is a made-up social construct. But this book, in probably, I'm going to say about the 2 volumes, is you're looking at about 800 pages, fully details why we treat it as if it's real, because there's a specific purpose. So the thesis of the book is that the white race, and that's in air quotes, is a social political invention, not a biological or natural category. His thesis is that it was created by colonial ruling elites to maintain social control over laboring populations. Sound familiar? This is going back to the 17th century, okay? So this notion of social control is not new, right? He posits that it really started in the English colonies in the 17th century, namely in Virginia, as a way of dividing the workers of European backgrounds versus the enslaved and indentured servant Africans. And that's very important to prevent a unified resistance. Sound familiar? Okay, right? And so he argues in like over 400 pages in one volume that the notion of racial oppression was simply a mechanism for maintaining ruling class power, right? And so the colonial elites needed to control large populations of laborers. Poor Europeans and Africans initially, this is so important historically, we never talk about it, initially shared similar economic conditions, and cooperation between these groups posed a threat to elite authority. Therefore, a racial hierarchy was created to prevent cross-class alliances. That's the basic premise of the book. And this notion of whiteness emerged through legal changes and institutional practices to that end. So laws were created to distinguish what the experience of the indentured servant European was from what was the enslaved African, right? And all of a sudden, there came privileges, white privilege, in terms of what, quote unquote, whites could do versus what Africans could do, right? And these had to do with legal protections, access to land or arms, and freedom from permanent slavery, meaning even those indentured servant Africans were basically put into permanent slavery, right? As a way of distinguishing them from their quote unquote European counterparts at the time. The most fascinating thing is, and why this gets to why we're talking about what we're talking about, is he aligns this notion of racial domination with Ireland and essentially how the British created oppression over the Irish, right? In terms of using a racial hierarchy. Now, these are Caucasians racially, but the British are making a racial separation in terms of the Irish, right? And so that sort of national oppression, eventually the concept then becomes racial oppression used throughout in terms of the United States. So what eventually happens is you have the African labor became permanent hereditary slavery. The Europeans are then defined as free or potentially free labor, so they could basically define their earn their freedom, if you will. And then, of course, we have the racial hierarchy, which we know so well now as institutional racism, in essence. Okay, so this is the beginning of what we're now defining as, in my view, what we're now defining as white nationalism, white privilege, or even quote unquote the white race, right? Which again is ridiculous, but let's just stay there. That said, now skip ahead to the theme of today. The theme of today is don't call me white. And that means do not, because I am Caucasian, does not mean I am part of what some people today would call the heritage culture or quote unquote white nationalism. Right? That's what we're getting at. And when you think of cultural responsiveness, what we're saying is that just because somebody is Caucasian does not mean that they are white. No different than saying just because somebody's African does not mean they are quote unquote Black. And we're saying that from a cultural standpoint, ethnic, not racial, right? And so we're trying to make that distinction because the premise applies to all people, right? So I know people in my life who do not claim to be part of white nationalism or heritage culture or what we've defined historically as white race, but they claim their ethnic identity, if you will, which could be a range of identities: Polish, Irish, German, whatever you want to call it. No different than if you are quote unquote Latino, you could be Mexican, Guatemalan, El Salvadoran, right? And that is the premise for all peoples, right? You have this sort of like larger category, which is quote unquote racially defined. And maybe we should just unpack how that becomes defined as race. But if you know my work, all you got to do is look up Blumenbach, right? But underneath that, we have a whole host of cultures, and we could apply it for Asian, we could apply it for Latin, and we can apply it for African as well, right? And underneath that umbrella would be what we call today the Black experience, which in essence is the quote unquote U.S. experience for Africans who were enslaved in the United States, right? But culturally, very different from Africans who would be in Brazil or Africans who would be in the motherland. And my point overall is these are cultural differences. The problem is if you are Caucasian, you don't get that nuance. And the purpose of this series is to try to bring that nuance. So we're going to explore, don't call me white, call me X, and hear people's histories and how they identify culturally, and how do they exist in a world that gives them privilege based on their race, even though they're not culturally aligned with it. Okay. And our first brave soul to delve into this is our very first guest. Her name is Carrie Sotro, and she's from California, like me. And she's someone that works with Etiwanda School District. And I've been working with Etiwanda for 5-6 years or so. Great district, has been very, very receptive to cultural linguistic responsive. I consider it the model district in terms of implementation, and pretty much you could go in many, many classrooms and you could see exactly what this is in practice. And Carrie and I, therefore, have been working very, very closely since day one. I took the New Mexico Department of Education to Etiwanda because I wanted them, as well as others, to see a model district. And Carrie and I just happened to be talking at the end of the day. Now, folks, we've been knowing each other for 6 years. And I made a historical, I would say, ignoramus thought, right? Etiwanda School District, for their, I guess you could say, emblem or their symbol, they have a grape. It's a purple grape. And it's if you pull them up on the Etiwanda.org right now, you'll see the grape. And I've been seeing this grape forever, but I never knew what it meant. And Carrie, when they were so kind to, welcome our guests from New Mexico, she gave a history of where the grape came from and why, when you come to the district, you're hired by the district, you get a pencil, and on the head of the pencil, there's a grape, right? So I'm sitting there listening to her, and I, being from California, I know a lot about the history of, the farm workers and grapes and, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta and all of that. And I'm thinking that you are using isn't that like kind of racist in the context of this is something that has, great California history, but the grape, it kind of also has a negative connotation as well. And she basically looked at me like, no, 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 no. At that time in history, it wasn't, Mexicans in the doing the crops. It was Italians. And I almost fainted. I was like, are you serious? And I couldn't believe my level of ignorance just in terms of California history, but also knowing the local history in terms of Southern California, because you could have paid me $1,000. I would have never attributed the crops in that area that would be run and developed by Italians who were in essence early immigrants coming from the east to the West Coast, and that's where they settled in. And I'm gonna let Carrie give you that history. My point is that I had made an assumption that the grapes meant something that they didn't mean, and then secondly, I had made an assumption about Carrie as well. And so that just led to a whole larger conversation. And I knew immediately that she would be the perfect person to be the first guest, as she sat there and schooled me on the the Italian history in this part of Southern California. So I know that was a long Dr. Holly's 2 cents, but I had to give you the history. I had to give you the background. I had to give you the context. We won't do this for every episode, just this first episode, okay? So Carrie Sotro, folks, has 2 decades of experience in education as a classroom teacher, mentor, state trainer, and district level leader. She has spent her career supporting students and educators who serve them, from kindergarten classrooms to leading induction programs and professional learning at the site and district level. Her work has always centered on one belief: when educators feel supported, valued, and equipped with strong systems, they thrive to do students. She has her master's and BA from California State University, San Bernardino. She has taught at the elementary level in the Etiwana School District, as well as the Ontario Montclair School District. And she has done a lot of leadership work around instruction, professional development, primarily in the context of induction or working with, professional development, which I know her because we work closely in terms of bringing CLR to Etiwanda and the professional learning there. So with that said, and there's a lot more to her, as you're about to find out. So let's welcome Carrie to the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Carrie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Glad to have you. It's I'm going to say it's a long time coming, and we weren't even aware of it.
Right. It fell in our lap.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you're our first guest around this theme of "Don't call me white, call me Italian." Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm really I'm delving into how I'm trying to take a deep dive into how we have perceived, fairly or unfairly, quote unquote, whiteness. Mm-hmm. At the expense of people's sort of origin culture that doesn't match necessarily the race part of it, because people are totally focused on race, obviously, mm-hmm. right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to put the focus on culture. And so you seem to fit the bill perfectly because of your Italian heritage, but because of our geographical location in California, and then people like me being ignorant of some of the Italian immigration history, I think you're the perfect guest to start this theme. So tell us a little bit about "Don't Call Me White, Call Me Italian," and what's your sort of origin story?
Awesome, thank you. And this will probably lead a little bit when we talk to maybe even rings of culture, but I really do subscribe to that Catholic Italian American culture. Growing up it was very evident to me that if somebody asked me, like, what are you? I always said, well, I'm Italian, because that was such a pride for my family growing up. Even though we're here in California, I grew up having Sunday mass, and you go to grandma and grandpa's. And my great grandparents, I was privileged enough to be able to have relationships with all of my great grandparents. I know that that's something that's very unique, but they were all very healthy people, which is great because I got access to their story and that culture. I think that if they hadn't also been living locally and within my scope, in my immediate family and the time I had with them, I probably wouldn't have known as much. But that really shaped a lot of who I am. And I never thought of anything different. It wasn't later in life that people were like, oh, well, you're white. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's my skin color. When I was a kid and you're doing the project and the teacher's got all the paper on the back table and you go and you pick up, I guess, what's close, peach, pink. They say that's white. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine, whatever. And I didn't think much of it. But recognizing how my family came here, it was a very big piece. Not only that I was Italian, I had a pride in that, but my family would correct me. So my family on both sides, so on my mother's side, when my family immigrated here, they went through Pennsylvania first, and then they actually moved to California. There's some lost details in how they came out here. I'm like, well, what was so bad about Pennsylvania that we're moving out west? But it was during the citrus boom. There was a lot of dry cropping also in the area. They moved actually to San Bernardino, which was like the LA in this area. It was, like Hollywood. In fact, one of the theaters in downtown Riverside was where Gone with the Wind was premiered. And so like the Mission Inn is a big piece of the historical culture. Interestingly enough, I didn't know it when my husband and I were looking for a place to get married. That was like a big connection piece for my family. And I didn't know that until later. But really rooted in that type of worker. Your hands are dirty. You worked like that. That was a big piece of my family's culture. Was you set your sights on something, you work for it. The citrus, like even my grandfather woke up in the mornings before school and did smudge pots. So during the winter, he would get up before school, he would go and light all the smudge pots. That was a part of his job as a child here in California.
Wow.
And those were the types of stories like I grew up with, and being able to learn that, citrus is a big thing in our area here in Southern California, especially in the Inland Empire, but to have my family a part of that was interesting. On my father's side, however, speaking of interracial ties, my grandfather and grandmother were considered of different races because my grandfather was Polish and my grandmother was Italian. And that was a no-no between those families. And so to kind of hear that story when I was younger, it didn't resonate. I'm like, what do you mean? Because I was also being taught that, well, you're white. So why wouldn't it make sense? You're both Catholic, does it matter if you're Polish and if you're Italian? And so kind of having that story in my background too, it really released a lot of, I don't know, when I grew up with friends and family and coworkers and sport mates, on different teams, I just didn't see that as a challenge that I'm sure other people, maybe that was their experience, right? It was odd, but because that was in my background, it never stood out to me.
Right, right. It's just so many interesting aspects to that. One for me is this notion that Polish and Irish would be considered like interracial versus quote unquote intercultural, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, I don't know if you know this, but I'm wondering where you get to a certain extent the pushback from a racial standpoint, right? Because so I could see like the white supremacists or dominant society saying we would not marry, people of non quote unquote whiteness, right? But do you know where was the pushback? Where was it coming from? Like who was playing the dominant role there?
What I was taught in my family around that story was that because when Italians came here, it's like little Italy, right? They have their pockets, and it was very important for them to maintain. It's interesting because it's a little bit of talking out of both sides of our mouth a little bit now that I'm looking at this as an adult, because it was like a want to maintain the culture and the tradition and their Italianness, I guess. And same thing on the other side with the Polish group. Part of that was that they wanted to, it was important that Italians marry Italians. In fact, I can even remember there was a piece of me when I started dating my husband in high school, and his last name, it's actually Spanish. He's Basque, but I was passing him off as Italian to my family for a very long time. He had Italian features, and he kind of had a name that could kind of pass for Italian. Not that I think it was going to make that big of a difference, but there was something in my upbringing that when I brought him to the family, it was almost like giving him an edge by trying to sell him off as Italian. And so I've never taken the time, transparency, to look into Chicago. I've never been to Chicago. I'm not up with what the time was there, but I know that that was a story that my grandparents had shared, especially when being here in California and having it so diverse and them seeing other groups marry each other. That's how that came up, because it would be in conversation like, oh, did you see so-and-so and so-and-so is getting married? Well, remember when, Grandpa and our families wouldn't even acknowledge. So it's interesting that those stories of the past would come out by recognizing the change in the culture here in the times and just in California in general, and having it be so diverse.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. When you mentioned it at school, you kind of started at school, but when did you recognize that there was a clear separation or distinction between being white, quote unquote, and being Italian?
I think where I can resonate with other groups of people on this is that it wasn't something I learned on my own. It was something I was taught and told. And so whether it was on the playground in elementary school, when you're talking to friends, and because I grew up in a very diverse area, by the way, it wasn't all affluent white people, which I think that's their initial inclination of, oh, well, this is where you came from. That wasn't it. And I'm really grateful that experience, because I think that's really helped support all of my work moving forward as an adult. But it was in school, when you're doing those types of activities. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, I'm Italian American. And also, I think because that was so important for my family to recognize that we were American. And so I also recognize that that's a privilege, that maybe I didn't have to think of my whiteness, that I was more concerned about my origin and what I subscribed to there. But I remember feeling very passionate and wanting to be seen as Italian American.
And were you able to sustain that as you continued to matriculate through our school system and then on to post-secondary? Or did you begin to, and I'm going to use the term assimilate, quote unquote?
Yes, I think that's appropriate. And I would also, I think assimilation was emphasized in our family. And in talking with you and with other people and kind of digging back into this, being a little person and thinking of themselves one way, which is fine, and then working through, and it's like, okay, so the majority of everybody sees you this way. Fine. Check the box. I'm this. Okay. And I just brought that whiteness as a part of me. Okay. I'm white. And I'm also Italian American, and that's how I think of myself fully. It's a part of me. But my grandparents were my great grandparents, were very clear that, you were Italian. And also you were American. It was like, we immigrated here for you to have a different experience and to have different opportunities. It was very important for them, for us to honor the culture, but almost on Sundays, right? Through mass and through tradition and holidays. But when you're out in the world, no, you don't speak it. No, you speak English, you speak English, and you American. And it was like, okay, yes, you're American and you speak English. And so I've always, it would be a disservice, I feel like, to my family not to subscribe to the full American culture and to the white culture too, because they were so passionate about that assimilation as well. And I'm sure there was a lot of reasons, because everybody filters through their beliefs and own experiences, why they felt so strongly about that. And that shaped how I moved through the rest of the school system.
So you said your great-grandparents, were your grandparents just as adamant, and were your parents just as adamant? And does that mean that you're not fluent in Italian?
All of the above, yes. And so, and that's the downside of it, right? Because when you have your family who decided to make the decision to immigrate here to the States for a host of different reasons, and have the sole goal to assimilate to the American culture and way of living and speaking the language, the emphasis is you to give away parts of that. And so, my sister, thank goodness, was able to go and do all of her college in Rome. So she got to go and live 6 years in Rome. She's fluent in the language. And so we're able to keep that part of our culture alive now with her kids specifically, and then dabbling and playing with my own. Also, it's important that our culture is outside of just nicknames, like I call my son my spicy meatball, like there's these little pieces of like, I'm going to call you my spicy meatball. And I still try to do things very intentionally. We do Sunday sauce. We have Italian food every Sunday. That is my thing. I make it by hand. The kids know every Sunday what we're having for dinner. That is so removed though from what my great grandparents had, then my grandparents, and then my parents and me, And so it's sad to see like that removal. But I'm happy with where I'm at in life too, with it. You make peace with it and you try to do the best so that your kids understand where your family came from and what they had to do for, we to have the life that we have.
Right. So let me ask you, this is probably, I think, the most sensitive question for folks like yourself. It's the idea that you have the privilege of always, or not always, but of being able to access whiteness. And so I wanted you to talk about, first of all, do you believe that's true? Secondly, have you seen yourself use that privilege? But how do you balance that, because you are totally down? I mean, you understand the dynamic of the issues of equity and what it means to be marginalized in this country. And I'm not saying that I'm saying that you do, as an educator, you're someone who gets it. But how have you balanced the privilege of accessing whiteness with that very keen notion of what equity is and how important it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I'm unique in my experience that because I grew up in a schooling system, like I said, my sports teams where I grew up, my community was extremely diverse. In fact, I was just looking at our high school yearbook and I was looking at the superlatives, and there was a picture in the background of this big tree that was at the high school, and you can see a picture of all of our friends there. And I thought to myself, wow, like, I'm not necessarily sure if we could take that same picture today, because I feel like everybody is very race bound sometimes and driven and focused. That tree is so representative of seeing like, wow, like there was every kind of person in our friend group that was represented. It wasn't as segregated. And so I'm really fortunate that I had that experience. It really wasn't until college that my whiteness was brought more to my attention through coursework, and then also through different projects, right? Putting yourself in different people's lived experiences, being exposed maybe to a little bit more that, other people have had a different experience. And so I think the first thing for me was just having a broader awareness that my experience was not like others. And as far as using it, what's unique also is that my first teaching job, I know that I don't have to walk into a room and be thoughtful of my skin color. And I'm grateful for that. I know that that's not everybody's experience. But that was the first time that I was really made aware, because I wasn't the dominant race and culture in that space. So for example, I was the only white teacher on the campus, and it was pointed out to me. It wasn't something that I was aware of. So I feel like my experience has always been pointed out to me. I don't think I've walked into spaces with an awareness. And whether it's the other teaching staff kind of making offhanded comments, right? The fact that when we go to lunch, I can't pronounce certain names and it's still a joke between some people, it's fine. Using my whiteness, I don't think that there's been a time where I've intentionally leaned into that either for an advantage. There has been a time where that was a disadvantage going into a different opportunity. I was wanting to work for what's known as like a premier type district. They had a perceived type of teacher, and they were also at a time where they were looking to change the dynamic of their workforce so it was more representative of their student community. And that, career-wise, was the first time I thought, could I not get this position maybe because of my skin color, because I'm blonde, I'm white, and is that going to be a barrier? And that was something that I had never considered as an experience for me. So that having to feel that I'm going to have to overcompensate. There could be this like hidden barrier that I'm not aware, directly aware of or can see, that I need to make sure that I get over to really kind of prove my capabilities, if you will.
Right. Yeah, it would be really cool in those situations if you could like flex your Italianness at that moment. Like to me, like that's when you would go like, I know y'all not hiring white people, but I am not white. I am Italian.
Yes. And you know what's funny is, when people do ask me like, what are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm Italian. But that is not the common conversation.
No.
It's not the common vernacular.
Right.
People are, you kind of forced into these boxes. And quite honestly, that's one of the reasons why when we were first introduced, 6 years ago, and I was picking up what you were putting down, I've never felt more validated in equity work, because I get lumped into, if you're white, this is your experience. And if you're Black, this is your experience. If you're Asian, but for some reason, there's this like connotation that if you're white, somehow you're also bad or that you just have everything, like the red carpet gets rolled out. And that can sometimes be a hurdle as well.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. All right. Well, what I'm going to do, because we could literally stay here for the whole episode.
Oh,
Right? I'm going to segue to your journey as an educator, but we always start off with, when did you know, prior to becoming an educator, that you sort of had what I consider like an inclination or a proclivity, whatever you want to call it, to be quote unquote equitable or responsive? For some people, some people recognized it when they were kids, right? It just depends. When did you know like you had, I would call, the gift?
As a child.
I
think, yes. Outside of my role as an educator, I am also a intuitive. It's something like I love and pour my heart in on the side and can serve other people in that manner. But when you are a young person, and I believe most of our young people are, you are more observant. You're able to read the energy of other people and the energy of a room and space. And when you're in that type of environment that's very social for 6 hours a day as a child, you start to pick up on the little nuances that occur. And then coupled with that, I'm also a very strong personality. Dr. Holly knows this. And I have this sense of justice and advocacy. And I don't know where that comes from. But I do say it feels divinely given oftentimes, because I have this need to support other people in finding their own power, in finding their own voice, recognizing that that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel right, doesn't sound right. And then following up and kind of coaching and mentoring, like I was that friend when I was even a little person. Or when you see somebody that was wronged, I was the person that's like, let's sign a petition. How dare that teacher throw a desk? Let's get him fired. Like I was that person.
Right.
And so I had a keen sense of awareness for people and their energy, and how sometimes maybe their words were not matching the emotion. And that's where this started for me, because I really felt like I had a special gift to help support other people recognize particular situations and to find their own power through them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that key to that is you recognizing it in the moment as a child. Because since I've been doing this podcast, a lot of people, they recognize it. They look back on the time and then they realize, I had that kind of perspective, but at that time when I was 8 or 10, I didn't know it. I think it's different when you know it, right? And you're aware of it when you're an 8-year-old, like that you have this superpower or that you have this intuitiveness. And so I think it makes what happens later stronger to some extent, right? So let's go there. Now you are an educator and you have your light bulb moment, knowing that you have this power of intuitiveness. What was your light bulb moment?
My light bulb moment actually started in my first teaching placement. And you and I have discussed this idea of North schools, South schools.
Yes.
And my first teaching placement, I was at what would be considered a South school. And, very different, even though it was a couple blocks south. I literally just went a couple blocks south of where I was living at the time. And the student demographic was very different. And obviously I was a quote unquote only white teacher there, which I still think is very interesting.
Right.
But my light bulb moment was that I felt at times I may have been the only advocate for believing that students could rise to the expectation regardless of their circumstance. That was my light bulb moment. Terms like these kids like make my skin crawl sometimes. It's like my personal mission in life to wipe that from everybody's vocabulary, or these teachers. It goes both ways. These teachers, these kids, and recognizing that, wait a minute, when we were looking at students, and we talk about like humanizing the data, right? And we're looking at how we can grow them and provide them, access just like any other student. I that was when I was it was like put in my face that I was going to be dealing with mindsets. I was going to be dealing with a belief gap within my team, within my little grade level team, because I'm like, well, what do you mean they're not going to be able to meet this goal? Well, these kids, Carrie, they, we're at a Title I school. We were a program first school. We're a reading first school. They, they don't have any help. They don't, and it's like, all right, but we've got them for 6 hours, right? And so that was my light bulb moment.
Tell me this though, were you treated like the crazy one? Or was it like, who she thinks she is, this white woman coming in here?
Oh, yes, because then I got the whole tag of, I think I'm like the white savior, right?
Right,
Look at her coming from her affluency, she's never experienced a challenge in her life. I've had it so easy that I just can come in here and, do my thing. And on top of that, the age culture gap, right?
Between you and other staff?
Between me and the other staff members. So
Okay.
I was also the youngest member of the staff. I went through a teaching program where I got my credential and bachelor's in 4 years. So I was 21.
Wow.
In fact, when I had my first set of family conferences, I had a parent come in, and I started in the mid-year too. A teacher had just walked out on these kids, and I felt terrible. And and I was a long-term sub first for like a week, and I had that classroom set up. I was like, no, we're doing this. And the parent came in and said, excuse me, I'm looking for Miss So-and-so. Is your mom here? I was like, ma'am, I am the teacher. Come on in, And so that was another barrier I had to experience through age.
Right.
And them looking at, you're young, you don't know, you don't have any experience, you don't know these kids, just wait, you'll find out. It's very it's crabs in a bucket.
Yeah. Yeah. And I assume that you didn't get sucked in. You stood. That's where you being, all about sense of justice and advocacy, that's probably when it kicked in.
Oh, 100%. I mean, and then I am very competitive. I have a very competitive nature. And I'm like, oh, so we're going to look at these test scores like every unit? Perfect. I'm going to let the numbers talk then. I'm going to show, we need to have an example that this can happen despite all of these other perceived barriers that are in place. And then to believe that because these kids are of a certain subgroup that they can't learn like other students. No, sometimes I feel like the difference is our own belief set and our own expectation. And realizing that, it might take a couple extra steps to get them there, but it's absolutely achievable for everybody.
Right. Yeah, I can kind of relate to that in the context from the age part because, and I looked at the data and because I was basically placed as, I don't know the term for it, but I don't remember the term for it, but it was the transitional, it was the class that was supposed to get kids who were in ELL transitioned out. And, at that time they had to exit out. They had to take a test to exit out. And I taught that class before they took the test.
Okay.
And we had a very poor passing rate. And then I came in, young guy, like fully educated, bilingual, had my CLAD. That's what we called it at the time.
Yeah.
Right. And then they started talking about the numbers, and my attitude was, let's go, let's do this. I remember, right? And I ended up over a 2-year period having the highest passing rate of all the other teachers who taught this class. And I always used it, as leverage. When people would come at me, I'm like, wait a minute. Who has the highest passing rate in this school? Like that kind of thing, right?
100%.
I can relate to that in terms of being the young buck on the block.
Yeah.
That's what resonated with me when you brought in the data thing. Yeah, because it's important that we have results, right? And we're not just quote unquote advocating. And I think that's one of the issues in today's world. We're doing a lot of advocating, but are we getting the results? Are we getting the outcomes? And I just mean that overall. All right, let's go to what I call the fun question. The fun question is about the rings of culture. And we ask people to pick 2 that resonate with you and also tell us a little more about who you are.
Okay, well, I think I led a little bit just with the Catholic, Italian, American,
right.
All of that. And then also on top of that too, I think what's unique and interesting is that because I am intuitive, I think that little bubble of spirituality plays a big role. I think that that's something that sets me apart and is unique, being Catholic, but then also kind of having to grapple and struggle with the perception. Is this okay? Is it not okay? Dr. Holly, you just found that out about me, and we've been working together for years. It's not something that I lead with, and that's intentional. And I think that has really broadened my awareness and perspective also about how people hide parts of themselves. And the reason that they hide parts of themselves is because they don't feel like it is in alignment with the dominant culture in the setting in which they're in, right? So that for me, having this experience as a medium, as an intuitive, and also as an educator, and being able to learn how also to keep certain things separate. Yes, I have all these parts of Rings of Culture, but I think I don't actually, it kind of goes back to your original question of like, how do you leverage your whiteness? It kind of reminds me of that. I have learned how to almost adapt to the different environments that I'm in. What's the dominant culture in the space that I'm in? And how can I be of best service in that space? So is it going to be my Italian American side? Is it going to be, that I'm a female? Is it going to be that I'm an intuitive? Is it like, and then they all work together, but which one am I going to walk into the room with forward? That's how I've looked at the Rings of Culture. I loved when we first dipped into this because most of the equity work that I had seen previous was only about race. And I had a hard time connecting into that. But when we hit Rings of Culture, I was like, oh, yes, because it really does allow everybody to honor where they've come from. I felt like I was able to honor the sacrifices that my family has had to do. I'm the most educated person in my family on both sides. So it's very interesting, how all of those things have come together to play.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you are a great example of how the Rings of Culture are supposed to work. I mean, they work, the whole idea is it's universal. It works for everyone. But your way of, I think when you're saying like, you always look at what's the lead and then how do you fit? I think that's kind of like how we want people to do it, because it's actually a perfect segue into the notion of situational appropriateness, right? Which, before we get there, though, I do want to, because you mentioned, I didn't want to bring it up, but since you brought it up, and the whole notion of being a medium and the intuitiveness, my question is, what opportunities do you have to be the lead, or where that is the dominant, especially if we just stick within that spirituality, religion ring? I would imagine you don't have too many opportunities to lead with that. Is that true?
Yes and no. I think I have found most recently, well, the number one question that usually comes up when people, and the reason why I don't lead that with that in a room is because you're usually met with fear, or you're usually met with resistance due to another religious belief, right? And so the fear part is, are you reading me? In fact, I think when you first found out, your first question to me was like, oh, I'm going back through everything we've ever talked about. Like, what have I told you? And it's funny because I'm like, wait a minute. And one of the things that I brought up was, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I have worked my whole life learning the ethics of that work. Because it's divinely led. I feel like everybody's intuitive. I feel like we were all, as humans, living this beautiful experience given a GPS, and everybody uses the GPS to navigate, that their intuition a little differently. And we have different names for it out in the broad culture. For me at work, because I feel like it's unethical to read people without their permission. However, working with energy, we talk about being able to interpret the vibe of a classroom. So when you were starting to talk about vibe, I was like, take my money. Yes, yes, yes. Go on, because that is true. That's energetics. That's science. And so, and most people don't recognize they have it. Have you ever walked into a room of people and you're like, what just happened in here? Like the air feels thick. You can tell by the body language. You're like, something just happened in here. That is you picking up on the vibrational energy of a space. And now you can use that data to proceed accordingly, and that works. And I think now looking back, that's probably why I got, quote unquote, those kids in my classroom all the time. I had all the behavior, you name it, because we didn't have that problem. I was able to kind of get a sense maybe for what the vibe was going to be that day and help navigate through that. And that is a superpower. That's something that I think if a lot of teachers could turn up the volume on for themselves and intuit even their grade level conversations, just to learn how to navigate different types of people and how they might be feeling in a space, and having an awareness that everybody is filtering through the last conversation they just had with their admin or their partner or whatever it is. All of that comes into different spaces. And then I've created my own space. I have my own Instagram account, and that was a way for me to kind of pop the top off on a weekend. So I do readings for people, and I have a membership that I serve the community. And what's interesting is I'm still in a teaching role. I think teaching was always my calling.
This episode of Outrageous Love the Podcast is brought to you by CAT, Culturally Authentic Texts. A culturally authentic text, or CAT, is a piece of fiction or non that illuminates the authentic cultural experiences of a particular cultural group by centering voices, experiences, and perspectives directly from within the culture being represented, be it religion, socioeconomic status, gender, ethnicity, nationality, orientation, or geographic location. The language, situations, and illustrations must depict culture in an authentic manner as well. Texts like Once in a Blue Moon by Sharon G. Flake and Shift Happens by J. Albert Mann. For more examples of cats, check out our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube pages at Validate Affirm.
But I'm going to go to the situational appropriateness question, and this is all about cultural adaptation. I don't have to explain it to you. I'm really just trying to look for a time or place where you had to culturally or linguistically adapt. And the question was, did you pull it off or not?
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to do that now. One of the best aspects of my job, I'll go job first, and then I have kind of a funny personal story if we have time. But job-wise, I work with our induction program. It's the best part of my job. So I get to work with all of our new teachers and clearing their credentials for 2 years. And I started noticing, I've always had to kind of break the ice, if you will. The moment where you need to say the joke. I speak in movie lines. I speak in song lyrics. And I'm starting to battle the age appropriateness, the situational appropriateness because of the age culture in the room. And we said it just literally let up. And I said a comment around, if we've got a problem, we'll solve it. And I was like, check out the hook while the DJ resolves it. Normally, I have the whole room with me. Crickets.
Right.
I have never been more mortified in my life. I was like, vanilla ice. Anyone? And it was crickets. And I was like, oh my gosh, these kids, quote unquote, they were born in late 2000. And I'm like, I still feel like this is a good cultural reference, guys. More money, more problems. I can go on and on and on. And so that is a really great one of just me walking in and trying to, connect with the kids. And no, I failed. And it's probably still a joke by many. And it's okay. I'm willing to fall on the sword and learn and whatever. That's an age one. And so I've literally had to go back through. But see, here's where I love, I'm a student at heart. So I will go back, I will learn. I started looking up, when are these kids born? What group do I need to go to? What music are we listening to? What, cartoons and movies and things were, really popular as they were coming up. And now I've been able to weave those things in, and they land. It's also funny because I'm saying or doing them. And so they appreciate the effort, I think, quite honestly. And I'm willing to throw myself out there and do it. And then ask them too, trying to learn a little bit more how that's shaping the context. But the other thing is we have my husband's family, like I said, is Basque. And a couple of them have married into predominantly Mexican families. And part of my culture is around time and situational appropriateness around time and how that's perceived. And so here I am on time for said family event, baby shower, birthday party. And we're like a couple hours in, and the party ain't getting started until a couple hours in. And now let me say, I know that that's not every Mexican family's culture, but this is what my experience is with their families right now. And I have learned now, I don't show up to the party until way later because I will miss it. And that's just a way I've been able to shift things. And I've thought about it though, because for me, if I were to show up late to my family's Sunday, get together, it would be perceived as very disrespectful.
Right.
And so learning that time, even that was something I learned working with you, is part of, a group's culture and how it's perceived. So those are two areas that I've recognized where I need to grow and how I might have adjusted.
Right. And so both of those are examples where you did not, well, one, initially you did not culturally adapt, but then you learned to culturally adapt, right? Mm-hmm. So with the youth culture example, you needed to come in with some examples
fresh,
right?
Fresh material.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then the time example, you realize you can't be the first one there, right?
No.
Yeah, right. The funny thing about that, Carrie, what I have an interest in is taking it full circle with the conversation. I wonder, and we can look this up, by the way. I wonder to what extent is Italian culture in its authenticity relative or precise? Mm-hmm. Or is the preciseness coming out of so-called white culture?
I would put a lot of money on white culture.
Yeah.
Because even my sister, having her own experience living in Italy, the pace was something that she had a really hard time coming back to the States and living here.
Right.
Time is very different there. They do have blocked off time for rest. The rush culture that we have here is very, very different. And it took a while, even just going out to dinner, for most of us here, it's like an early type experience. And there, no, you're on and courses. It was just a very unique experience to her. And when she came back, that was a big lift.
Yeah. And it just speaks to a lot of things that I think people who consider themselves, and I mean this across races, not associating themselves with whiteness. They're not thinking of it like in little nuanced ways, like concept of time, right?
Yes.
How we've subscribed to that notion of preciseness because it's so part of our institutionality here. Last question has to do with what's your pick up, get up, keeps you going, knowing that this work in equity, social justice, advocacy is always an uphill climb, sometimes steeper than other times. The incline can vary, but it's always you're going against the wind. So what keeps you going? What is in terms of art, whatever, what's your well, as I call it?
Oh my gosh, I have so much. So I think the first thing is that I always start my day very cognizant of what am I choosing today? Am I choosing love or fear? I think every decision that you make throughout the day is driven by one of those paths.
Yeah.
Every decision.
Yeah.
And it never goes really well when you're working out of a fear framework. So, how can I show up and, with outrageous love, seek to understand, be curious, try to leave people better than where you found them, obviously. And so that's usually my moniker, that's how I wake up in the morning, and I do try my best. I'm very reflective at night because of that competitive nature. In fact, I'm in my office. I have it up on my wall behind me for my kids too, but there's a quote by Nelson Mandela. Oh, you can't see it. But it says, it always seems impossible until it's done.
Yeah.
And I really do feel like if I can go through my day with the filter and the belief that good things can happen, and that I'm always looking for the positive change and not always focusing on the gap and focusing on the thing that's wrong. I feel like there's a layer of leading by example. And then people see examples in the world that are contrary maybe to what they find the white female to be. And I think that's important. Like, I think I'm obligated to show up in the world and to give that example through daily acts of kindness, through my work, both in education and then outside of education. So that's what kind of inspires me to grow. You would ask me a little bit about maybe a quote or a song. So this is my love language. My love language is music. I listen to everything.
Okay.
But there is a song. I'm a huge Stevie Nicks fan.
Okay.
I love her. I have seen Fleetwood Mac lots of times. I just feel like she's a lyrical genius and was ahead of her time. But the song Gypsy, there's a lot of places in my life that I've had imposter syndrome and where I haven't felt good enough, and who am I to do whatever? And I have to work through that a lot every single day. And there's this one part in the song, it says, "To the gypsy that remains, her face says freedom with a little fear." And I love that because it's the longing for this freedom, the longing for, change, but it's okay to have that tinge of fear on the face. And then it goes on, she says, "I have no fear." So now it's like we're reconvincing ourselves, nope, you've got this. I have no fear, have only love. And if I was a child and the child was enough for me to love, enough to love. That part of the song, I will cry. I don't care where I'm at. If it's in the middle of the grocery store on a Sunday morning, and that song comes on because it reminds me of the gypsy that maybe I am. I don't feel like I fit a particular box or mold. I feel like I choose love, but I know that comes with a little bit of that tinge of fear to like jump over the hurdle and to push forward.
Yes. That's wonderful. You that was a nice kind of Nelson Mandela, Stevie Nicks.
Yeah.
In there.
Wouldn't have thought those were in the same category, but there you go. See,
Well, thank you. This was great. Way to kick it off. The series, and I just really feel blessed to not only be able to do the work with you in your district, but now just to know you. Like, I feel like, I just, like, we opened up a whole nother space. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, folks. That was fascinating. It's one of those episodes that could go for literally a couple of hours, and we are longer than I expected. So longer than usual, I should say. Not that I expected. I knew this was going to be a longer episode, but I think it's fascinating for me. It's very provocative, and she brought so many things to the table in terms of the Italian history and this very thin line that I think some Caucasians have to walk in terms of not wanting to embrace whiteness, quote unquote, but realizing that racially there's a benefit, right? And when we talked about the situational appropriateness, I think that it kind of came out in terms of it's hard to tease out what we have culturally sort of accepted from, quote unquote, white culture that we may not be aware of. But I think the irony, and I hope that you'll understand this as we develop the series, that it's not just Caucasian, quote unquote, right? I think we all have elements that we have adopted in terms of quote unquote whiteness that we are not aware of, right? Or at worst, that we've adopted in terms of national culture. But the question is, where's the line with whiteness versus our national culture, right? Now, for me, I'll give you my answer. These are all dynamic experiences. It's not black and white, but it is something fascinating to think about, or interesting, just from a curiosity, especially like intellectual curiosity, to kind of unpack your own sort of cultural self and say, what kind of mores and norms have I unknowingly adopted and which ones have I not, right? And I think that it's harder when you're Caucasian and there's a certain expectation in terms of whiteness, yet you do have this sort of other culture, if you will, in this case, Italian, whatever it is. And I think for other cultures, it's more clear because religion becomes an intersection, right? Whereas Italian culture, maybe not so much, if just depends on the influence of Catholicism, essentially, right? So great stuff. Can't wait for the next episode. And we will continue to explore Don't Call Me White, right? And I want to thank Carrie for being our first guest, our first brave guest, and kind of putting herself out there. And I want to give a shout out, dedicating this episode to the Etiwanda School District for all the great work that they're doing around cultural and linguistic responsiveness. And I want to thank our editor, the A-team, as I call him, Andrew. And I want to say to you, thank you. We want to pass this on to a friend. Tell them all they got to do is do a download. They don't have to listen to it. We're trying to reach 1,000 downloads for a month, because then you get a different status. And we average about 300 or so a month. So we got a long way to go, folks, but you can help us out. Until the next time, stay fabulous and show outrageous love.
Outrageous Love, the podcast, is edited, produced, and includes original music by me, Andrew Hawheim, in association with Dr. Shiraki Holly and the Center for Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning. If you have questions about our services, curriculum, or want to know more about how to bring outrageous love and cultural responsiveness to your area, visit www.culturallyresponsive.org to learn more. And please rate, review, and subscribe to Outrageous Love, the podcast.